The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Adelaide Cottage as Princess Charlotte bounced excitedly on her bed, her blonde curls catching the golden light. Today was special. It was the annual school charity fundraiser at Lambrook School, and she had been looking forward to it for weeks. The 8-year-old princess had carefully chosen her favorite dress, a blue one that reminded her of the pictures she had seen of her mother, Catherine, wearing similar colors. Catherine sat on the edge of Charlotte's bed, gently brushing her daughter's hair while they chatted about the day ahead. The Princess of Wales had always made these quiet morning moments special, sharing stories and listening to Charlotte's endless stream of thoughts and questions. Today, Charlotte was particularly animated, talking about how she planned to help raise money for the local children's hospital. "Mummy, do you think the other children will like my idea about the cake sale?" Charlotte asked, her bright blue eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. She had spent the previous evening carefully writing out price tags for the homemade cupcakes Catherine had helped her bake. Catherine smiled warmly, tucking a strand of hair behind Charlotte's ear. "I think they'll love it, sweetheart. You've put so much thought and care into everything. That's what makes a good leader, caring about others and working hard to help them." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Prince George appeared in the doorway, already dressed in his school uniform, his hair slightly messy despite Catherine's earlier attempts to tame it. At 10 years old, he had developed a protective streak toward his younger sister, though he would never admit it openly. "Charlotte, you need to hurry up," George said, though his tone was more fond than impatient. "We don't want to be late, and Louis is already making a fuss about his breakfast." As if summoned by his name, 5-year-old Prince Louis came running down the hallway, his school bag dragging behind him and one sock conspicuously missing. Catherine laughed softly, standing up to chase after her youngest son, leaving Charlotte to finish getting ready. The drive to Lambrook School was filled with the usual sibling chatter. Charlotte sat between her brothers in the back seat, occasionally glancing out the window at the familiar countryside rolling past. She loved these moments when it felt like they were just a normal family, heading to school like any other children in England. The security detail following discreetly behind was easy to forget when George was making jokes about his mathematics teacher, and Louis was singing an off-key version of a song he had learned in music class. When they arrived at school, Charlotte kissed her mother goodbye and joined her classmates who were gathering near the main entrance. The fundraiser was set to begin after morning lessons, and Charlotte could barely contain her excitement. She had been planning her contribution for weeks, not just the cake sale, but also a small presentation about the importance of helping sick children. Her best friend, Emma, rushed over as soon as she spotted Charlotte. Emma was the daughter of a local family who had become close friends with the Wales family, and the two girls had bonded over their shared love of horses and adventure stories. Emma's family treated Charlotte exactly like any other child, which the young princess treasured. "Charlotte, did you bring the cupcakes? My mom said she'll buy at least 6, Emma said breathlessly, her cheeks flushed from running across the playground. "Yes, and Mummy helped me make special ones with little flowers on top," Charlotte replied, her face lighting up. She said that even small acts of kindness can make a big difference in someone's life. The two girls joined their classmates as they filed into the school building. Charlotte's teacher, Mrs. Henderson, was a kind woman in her 50s who had been teaching at Lambrook for over 20 years. She had a gentle way of treating all her students equally while being mindful of Charlotte's unique position. Mrs. Henderson had worked hard to create an environment where Charlotte could be just another student, participating in all the normal activities of childhood. During morning lessons, Charlotte found it difficult to concentrate on her mathematics problems. Her mind kept wandering to the afternoon's events and all the money they might raise for the hospital. She had visited a children's hospital with her parents the previous month, and the experience had left a deep impression on her young heart. She remembered the brave smiles of the sick children and how her mother had knelt down to talk to each one, making them feel special and important. When lunchtime finally arrived, the excitement in the school was palpable. Tables had been set up in the main hall, decorated with colorful balloons and handmade signs created by the students. Charlotte's cake sale table was positioned near the entrance, and she felt a flutter of nervous anticipation as she arranged her cupcakes in neat rows. Parents began arriving for the fundraiser, many of them familiar faces from school events and local community gatherings. Charlotte noticed how some of the newer parents seemed slightly awed to be in the same room as a member of the royal family, but the regular school community treated her with the same warm familiarity they always had. Mrs. Patterson, the mother of one of Charlotte's classmates, approached the cake sale table with a warm smile. She was a friendly woman who volunteered frequently at school events and always made an effort to include all the children in activities. "These cupcakes look absolutely delicious, Charlotte," Mrs. Patterson said, examining the carefully decorated treats. "You and your mother must have spent quite a bit of time making them so beautiful." Charlotte beamed with pride. "We did. Mummy taught me how to pipe the frosting, and I chose all the colors myself. Each one is different because I wanted them to be special for the children in the hospital." As Mrs. Patterson selected several cupcakes and placed her money in the donation box, Charlotte felt a warm glow of satisfaction. This was exactly how she had imagined the day would go. People coming together to help others, everyone working toward the same good cause. However, not far from Charlotte's table, a small group of parents had gathered near the coffee station. Among them was Mrs. Victoria Thornfield, a woman who had recently moved to the area and enrolled her daughter at Lambrook. Mrs. Thornfield was elegant and well-dressed, but there was something sharp in her manner that made others slightly uncomfortable. Mrs. Thornfield had been watching Charlotte with interest, her expression thoughtful and calculating. She turned to the other parents in her group, lowering her voice, but not quite enough to prevent her words from carrying. "It's quite remarkable, isn't it?" Mrs. Thornfield said, stirring her coffee slowly. "How they managed to maintain such a normal facade. Though I suppose it's easier when you simply pretend certain uncomfortable truths don't exist." The other parents shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond to the cryptic comment. Mrs. Jenkins, a longtime member of the school community, tried to redirect the conversation. "Charlotte is such a sweet child," Mrs. Jenkins said firmly. "She's always been kind to all the other children and works very hard in her classes." Mrs. Thornfield smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, I'm sure she is. Children often are innocent of their parents' choices, aren't they? It's not her fault that she doesn't know the whole truth about her family's history." Meanwhile, Charlotte continued serving customers at her cake sale, completely unaware of the conversation taking place across the room. She was in her element, chatting with classmates' parents and younger siblings, carefully making change and keeping track of how much money they were raising. Emma's little brother, a 6-year-old named James, approached the table with his pocket money clutched in his small fist. He was shy around most adults, but had always felt comfortable with Charlotte, who treated him like a beloved younger brother. "I want to buy a cupcake for my granny," James said quietly. "She's been sad because she hurt her leg and can't go to her garden club anymore." Charlotte's heart melted at the thoughtful gesture. She carefully selected one of her prettiest cupcakes, decorated with purple flowers that she knew James's grandmother would love. "This one is perfect for your granny. The purple flowers will remind her that people are thinking about her and hoping she feels better soon." As James carefully carried his cupcake away, Charlotte felt the deep satisfaction that came from helping others. This was what her parents had taught her, that their position was meant to be used in service of others, especially those who needed help or comfort. The afternoon continued successfully, with students and parents rotating between different fundraising activities. There was a lucky dip organized by the Year 6 students, a secondhand book sale run by the school librarian, and a small cafe where parents could buy tea and homemade sandwiches. The atmosphere was warm and community-minded, exactly what Charlotte had hoped for. As the event began winding down, Charlotte started packing up her remaining cupcakes, feeling proud of how much money her table had raised. Mrs. Henderson approached to help, praising Charlotte's hard work and natural ability to connect with people. "You've done wonderfully today, Charlotte," Mrs. Henderson said, carefully placing the leftover cupcakes in a box. "Your presentation about the Children's Hospital was particularly moving. You have a real gift for making people care about important causes." Charlotte glowed under the praise, but as she looked around the now quieter hall, she noticed her friend Sophie standing alone near the windows, looking upset. Sophie was usually one of the most cheerful children in their class, always ready with a joke or a kind word for anyone who needed it. Concerned, Charlotte quickly finished packing and hurried over to her friend. Sophie's eyes were red-rimmed, and she was clutching a tissue in her small hands. "Sophie, what's wrong?" Charlotte asked gently, sitting down beside her friend on the window seat. Sophie looked up with a confused and hurt expression. "Charlotte, is it true what Mrs. Thornfield said about your mummy? About her doing something bad before you were born?" Charlotte felt a cold feeling settle in her stomach, though she didn't understand why. "What did she say?" "I don't know what you mean." Sophie glanced around nervously, as if making sure no adults were listening. "She was talking to some of the other mums, and she said that your mummy, that she stole your daddy from someone else. Someone who was supposed to marry him first. She said there are pictures and everything, but that your family pretends it never happened." The words hit Charlotte like a physical blow, even though she didn't fully understand what they meant. She knew her parents loved each other very much. She had seen in the way they looked at each other, in their gentle touches and shared laughter. The idea that her mother might have done something wrong seemed impossible. "That's not true," Charlotte said quietly, but even as she spoke, she felt uncertainty creeping in. "My mummy would never hurt anyone. She's kind and good, and she helps people." Sophie reached out and took Charlotte's hand. "I don't think it's true either. Mrs. Thornfield doesn't even know your family." But she was saying it like it was a fact, and some of the other mums looked uncomfortable, like maybe they had heard something too. Charlotte felt tears pricking at her eyes, but she blinked them away. She didn't want to cry at school, especially not when so many people were around. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and she found herself thinking about conversations she had overheard between adults, whispered comments that stopped when children entered the room. The rest of the school day passed in a blur. Charlotte tried to focus on her afternoon lessons, but her mind kept returning to Sophie's words. During art class, while they were supposed to be painting pictures of their families, Charlotte found herself staring at the blank paper, unsure how to proceed. How could she paint a happy family picture when she suddenly wasn't sure if everything she believed about her family was true? When the final bell rang, Charlotte gathered her things slowly, her usual excitement about going home replaced by a heavy feeling in her chest. She said goodbye to Sophie and Emma, trying to act normal, but she could tell that Sophie was still worried about her. The drive home was quieter than usual. George was tired from football practice and dozed against the window, while Louis chattered about his day to their protection officer in the front seat. Charlotte stared out at the passing countryside, her mind churning with questions she didn't know how to ask. When they arrived at Adelaide Cottage, Catherine was waiting for them in the kitchen, having just returned from her own afternoon engagements. She looked beautiful as always, her hair neatly styled and her dress crisp despite her busy day. But for the first time in her life, Charlotte found herself studying her mother's face, looking for signs of the deception that Mrs. Thornfield had suggested. "How was the fundraiser, sweetheart?" Catherine asked, giving Charlotte a warm hug. "I want to hear all about it. Did you raise lots of money for the hospital?" Charlotte hugged her mother back, breathing in her familiar scent of subtle perfume and the lavender fabric softener she used. Everything about her mother seemed the same as always, kind, loving, genuine. But the doubt was there now, a small, persistent voice asking uncomfortable questions. "It was good, Mummy," Charlotte said, her voice smaller than usual. "We raised quite a lot of money. Everyone liked the cupcakes." Catherine noticed the subdued tone immediately, her maternal instincts picking up on the change in her daughter's mood. She knelt down, so she was at Charlotte's eye level, gently brushing a strand of hair away from the little girl's face. "You seem a bit quiet. darling? Did something happen at school? Sometimes these big events can be overwhelming, even when they're fun. Charlotte looked into her mother's concerned blue eyes and felt the familiar warmth of being completely loved and protected. How could someone who looked at her with such pure love have done something cruel to another person? It didn't make sense, but the doubt was still there, making everything feel uncertain and confusing. "I'm just tired, I think," Charlotte said finally, not quite meeting her mother's eyes. It was a long day. Catherine studied her daughter's face for a moment longer, clearly sensing that there was more to the story. But she also recognized that sometimes children needed time to process their thoughts before they were ready to share them. "Well, why don't you go wash up, and then you can tell me more about the fundraiser while I start dinner?" Catherine suggested. "Daddy should be home soon, and I know he'll want to hear all about your successful cake sale." As Charlotte headed upstairs to her room, she felt the weight of her confusion settling more heavily on her young shoulders. Her bedroom was her sanctuary, decorated in soft colors with shelves full of beloved books and a window seat where she liked to read and think. But today, even her safe space felt different, touched by the uncertainty that Mrs. Thornfield's words had created. She sat on her window seat and looked out at the gardens, where she and her brothers often played elaborate games of adventure and imagination. Everything looked the same as always, but Charlotte felt as though she was seeing it all through a different lens. Was her happy, secure world built on something that wasn't entirely true? And if it was, what did that mean for everything else she believed about her family and herself? The sound of her father's car in the driveway interrupted her troubled thoughts. Prince William was home from his day of royal duties, and Charlotte could hear his voice downstairs as he greeted Catherine and asked about the children's day. His voice sounded warm and normal, full of the love and interest he always showed in their activities. Charlotte knew she should go downstairs and join her family for dinner, should share the happy details of the successful fundraiser, and bask in her parents' pride. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted today, and she wasn't sure how to find her way back to the innocent confidence she had felt that morning. As she finally made her way downstairs, Charlotte carried with her the first real burden of doubt she had ever experienced. The carefree little girl who had bounced excitedly on her bed that morning felt like a memory from long ago, replaced by someone older and more uncertain, someone who had learned that the adult world held complexities and potential betrayals that she was only beginning to understand. Dinner at Adelaide Cottage that evening was a quieter affair than usual. The family sat around their familiar oak table, with William asking about everyone's day and Catherine serving the shepherd's pie that had become one of Charlotte's favorite meals. Lewis chatted excitedly about a science experiment his class had done, involving volcanoes and baking soda, while George shared the details of his football match during lunch break. Charlotte pushed her food around her plate, responding when spoken to but lacking her usual enthusiasm for family dinner-time conversations. William noticed her subdued behavior and exchanged a concerned glance with Catherine over the children's heads. "Charlotte, you've barely touched your dinner," William observed gently. "Are you feeling all right? Maybe you're coming down with something after such a busy day." Charlotte looked up at her father, taking in his kind expression and genuine concern. William had always been the parent she turned to when she needed comfort after a nightmare or wanted someone to listen to her worries about school. He had a way of making her feel heard and understood, never dismissing her concerns as childish or unimportant. "I'm not sick, Daddy," Charlotte said quietly. "Just thinking about things." "What kind of things?" Catherine asked, leaning forward slightly. Sometimes it helps to share our thoughts, especially when they're weighing on our minds. Charlotte hesitated, glancing between her parents. They both looked so normal, so loving and stable. It seemed impossible that there could be any truth to the ugly suggestions Mrs. Thornfield had made. But the doubt was still there, a persistent whisper that made her question everything she had always taken for granted. At the fundraiser today, Charlotte began slowly, I heard someone say something about our family, about things that happened before I was born. William and Catherine's expressions immediately became more focused, though they tried to keep their faces calm for Charlotte's sake. They had always known this day would come, the day when their children would hear rumors or speculation about their relationship and its history. They had discussed how to handle such moments, but actually facing it with their 8-year-old daughter felt more difficult than they had anticipated. "What kind of things did you hear?" William asked carefully, his voice remaining steady and reassuring. Charlotte looked down at her plate, struggling with how to put into words something she didn't fully understand. "Someone said that, Mummy, that she took you away from someone else. Someone you were supposed to marry first. They said there are pictures and that our family pretends it never happened." The silence that followed felt heavy and significant. Lewis continued eating his dinner, oblivious to the tension that had suddenly filled the room, but George looked up sharply, old enough to understand that something serious was being discussed. Catherine felt her heart clench as she looked at her daughter's troubled face. She had always dreaded this moment, when Charlotte would first encounter the public speculation and judgment about her parents' relationship. The reality was complex, involving real people and real emotions, but how could she explain such adult complications to a child? William reached across the table and gently took Charlotte's small hand in his larger one. "Charlotte, look at me, sweetheart. The person who said these things to you, do they know our family personally? Have they spent time with us and seen how we live and love each other?" Charlotte shook her head, thinking of Mrs. Thornfield's sharp expression and calculating tone. "No, she's new at school. I don't think she even knows us at all." "Then, how could she possibly know what's true about our family?" William asked reasonably. "People sometimes say things about our family because they think it's interesting to talk about, but that doesn't mean what they're saying is accurate or fair." Catherine leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Charlotte, what matters most is not what strangers say about us, but what you know to be true about our family. You see every day how much Daddy and I love each other, and how much we love you and your brothers. That love is real and true, no matter what anyone else might say." Charlotte considered this, looking between her parents' faces. Everything they said made sense, but she could still feel the confusion and hurt that Mrs. Thornfield's words had caused. But what if some of it is true? What if there are things I don't know about? George, who had been listening intently, suddenly spoke up. "Charlotte, remember when that boy at school said I cheated on my math test because I got a good grade? And it wasn't true at all, but he kept saying it anyway because he was jealous." Charlotte nodded, remembering the incident from a few months earlier when George had come home upset about false accusations from a classmate. "Sometimes people say mean things that aren't true," George continued with the wisdom of his 10 years. "And sometimes grown-ups do it too, especially about our family, because they think people will be interested in gossip." William smiled proudly at his eldest son's insight and protective instincts toward his sister. "George is absolutely right. People are curious about our family, and sometimes that curiosity leads them to say things that aren't accurate or kind." Catherine reached over and brushed a gentle hand across Charlotte's cheek. "Sweetheart, your father and I have always promised to be honest with you about important things. When you're older, if you want to know more about how our family came to be, we'll have those conversations. But right now, what you need to know is that you're deeply loved, our family is strong and real, and no one has the right to make you feel bad about who you are or where you come from." The weight in Charlotte's chest began to ease slightly as she absorbed her parents' words and the love evident in their expressions. The doubt was still there, but it felt less overwhelming when surrounded by the warmth and security of her family's support. "The lady who said those things," Charlotte said after a moment. "She seemed like she wanted to hurt us somehow. Not like she was just curious, but like she was happy to say something mean." William's jaw tightened slightly, though he kept his voice calm. "Unfortunately, there are sometimes people who feel that way. It's sad, but it happens. The important thing is that we don't let their negativity change how we see ourselves or each other. As dinner concluded and the children helped clear the table, Charlotte felt somewhat better, but still confused about many things. She understood that Mrs. Thornfield was wrong to say hurtful things about her family, but she also sensed that there were adult complexities she wasn't old enough to fully grasp yet. Later that evening, as Charlotte sat in the living room with her family, watching Louis build an elaborate tower with his blocks while George read a book about space exploration, she felt the familiar comfort of their normal routines. Catherine was curled up on the sofa with a cup of tea, occasionally helping Louis when his tower threatened to topple, while William sat in his favorite armchair, reviewing some documents, but always ready to engage with whatever the children were doing. This was her real life, not the dramatic stories that strangers told, but the quiet, loving moments that made up their actual family experience. Mrs. Thornfield might have her opinions and her gossip, but she wasn't part of this warm, secure world that Charlotte's parents had created for their children. As bedtime approached, Charlotte found herself looking forward to the evening routine that had always been one of her favorite parts of the day. William had a tradition of reading with each child individually, giving them his complete attention and making them feel special and important. When it was Charlotte's turn, they settled into her comfortable bedroom, with its soft lighting and shelves full of beloved books. William let Charlotte choose the story, and she selected one of her favorites, a tale about a brave princess who saved her kingdom through kindness and cleverness rather than magic or force. As William read in his warm, familiar voice, Charlotte felt the last of the day's tension beginning to fade. The story's themes of goodness, triumphing over meanness, seemed particularly relevant after a difficult afternoon. The princess in the book faced people who didn't understand her or who tried to make her doubt herself. But she stayed true to her values and found strength in the love of those who truly knew her. "Daddy," Charlotte said quietly as the story ended, "do you think the princess in the story ever felt scared that the mean people might be right about her?" William considered the question thoughtfully, recognizing its deeper meaning. "I think she might have sometimes. When people say hurtful things about us, it's natural to wonder if there might be some truth to their words. But the princess was wise enough to look at her own actions and the love of her family to know who she really was." Charlotte nodded, snuggling deeper into her covers. The people who loved her knew the truth, didn't they? Even when others tried to make them doubt. "Exactly," William said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "The people who truly know us, who see us every day and share our lives, they know who we really are. That's what matters most." As William tucked Charlotte in and turned off her bedside lamp, leaving only the small night light that she still preferred, Charlotte felt a sense of resolution settling over her. The events of the day had shaken her confidence and introduced her to the uncomfortable reality that not everyone in the world wished her family well. But surrounded by the love and security of her home, with parents who took her concerns seriously and brothers who would defend her, she felt strong enough to face whatever challenges might come. The house grew quiet as the rest of the family settled into their evening routines. Catherine checked on each child, spending a few extra minutes with Charlotte to make sure she was feeling better about the day's events. George read for a while longer before turning off his light, and Louis, exhausted from his active day, fell asleep almost immediately. But as the night deepened and the family slept, the events of the day continued to resonate in ways that none of them fully realized yet. Charlotte's innocence had been touched by the adult world's complications, and while her parents had handled the immediate crisis with love and wisdom, they both knew that more difficult conversations lay ahead. The gossipy words of Mrs. Thornfield represented just the beginning of what Charlotte would encounter as she grew older and more aware of the public scrutiny that surrounded her family. William and Catherine lay awake for a while that night, talking quietly about how to protect their children while also preparing them for the realities they would face as members of the royal family. Meanwhile, Charlotte drifted off to sleep with the comforting sounds of her secure home around her. The familiar creaking of the old cottage, the soft whisper of wine through the trees outside her window, and the knowledge that her parents were nearby, ready to protect and guide her through whatever challenges life might bring. The next morning dawned bright and clear with birds singing in the garden and the promise of a weekend filled with family time and simple pleasures. Charlotte woke feeling lighter than she had the previous evening, though the memory of Mrs. Thornfield's words still lingered in the back of her mind. During breakfast, the family's conversation was more relaxed and normal, with Lewis excitedly planning a fort-building project in the garden and George asking if they could visit the local riding stables that afternoon. Charlotte joined in the planning, her natural enthusiasm beginning to reassert itself as she focused on the happy activities ahead. Catherine watched her daughter carefully, relieved to see that Charlotte seemed to be bouncing back from the previous day's upset. She made a mental note to speak with the school about the incident, not to make a scene or demand consequences for Mrs. Thornfield, but to ensure that the staff were aware of the situation and could provide support if similar incidents occurred in the future. As the family prepared for their day together, Charlotte felt grateful for the simple fact of belonging to people who loved her unconditionally. Whatever complexities existed in the adult world, whatever gossip or judgment might be directed at her family, she had this foundation of love and security to return to. Mrs. Thornfield's words had hurt and confused her, but they hadn't managed to destroy the fundamental truth of her family's bond. The morning's activities, helping Catherine prepare a picnic lunch, playing an elaborate game of hide-and-seek with her brothers, and working together to build Lewis's ambitious garden fort, serve as a powerful reminder of what actually mattered in her life. These moments of connection and joy were her reality, far more significant than the speculation of strangers who knew nothing about who they really were as a family. By mid-morning, Charlotte had largely pushed the previous day's troubles to the background of her mind, though they remained there as a new awareness of the world's potential for unkindness. She was still the same confident, caring little girl she had always been, but she was also beginning to develop the resilience and perspective she would need as she grew older and encountered more of the world's complexities. The foundation her parents had built through years of consistent love, open communication, and strong family bonds was proving strong enough to weather this first real challenge to Charlotte's sense of security and identity. While she might never again possess quite the same innocent confidence she had before hearing Mrs. Thornfield's words, she was developing something equally valuable: the ability to distinguish between truth and gossip, between the opinions of strangers and the knowledge that comes from genuine love and intimate family connection. The weekend passed peacefully for the Wales family, filled with the kind of simple pleasures that had become precious to them in their relatively private life at Adelaide Cottage. Charlotte seemed to have recovered her spirits, throwing herself into family activities with her usual enthusiasm. However, Catherine noticed that her daughter had moments of quiet thoughtfulness that hadn't been there before, times when she would pause in the middle of playing to stare out the window or ask seemingly casual questions about how people form their opinions about others. On Monday morning, Charlotte returned to Lambert School with mixed feelings. She was excited to see her friends and continue with her normal school routine, but she also felt slightly anxious about potentially encountering Mrs. Thornfield again. The woman's words continued to echo in her mind, not because Charlotte believed them, but because they had introduced her to the uncomfortable realization that there were people in the world who might wish to hurt her family with their words. The morning passed normally, with Charlotte participating fully in her lessons and enjoying her time with Emma and her other close friends. During break time, she noticed that Sophie seemed back to her usual cheerful self, having apparently moved past the awkwardness of Friday's conversation. Charlotte was grateful for this return to normalcy, though she remained more observant than usual about the adults around the school. It was during lunch break that Charlotte's fragile sense of security was shaken once again. She was sitting with her friends near the playground equipment, enjoying the warm sunshine and sharing stories about their weekend activities, when she overheard a conversation between two older students from year 6. My mom was talking about it with her friend. One of the girls was saying, her voice carrying clearly across the playground. She said that Princess Charlotte's mom was basically a homewrecker. She stole Prince William from his girlfriend and then acted like she was this perfect princess when really she destroyed someone else's relationship. Charlotte felt the blood drain from her face as she heard these words. The casual, matter-of-fact way the older girl spoke made it somehow worse than Mrs. Thornfield's more obviously malicious comments. This sounded like something that was just common knowledge, something that everyone except Charlotte apparently knew and accepted. Emma, who was sitting beside Charlotte, immediately noticed her friend's distressed expression. "Charlotte, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Charlotte glanced around at her other friends, wondering if they had heard the older girl's conversation. Some of them looked uncomfortable, while others seemed oblivious to what had just been said. Charlotte felt a hot flush of embarrassment wash over her as she realized that people might be talking about her family all the time, discussing her mother's supposed wrongdoing as casual gossip. "I need to go inside," Charlotte said quietly, standing up abruptly. "I forgot I promised to help Mrs. Henderson with something." Emma looked concerned, but didn't press for more information, though Charlotte could feel her friend's worried gaze following her as she hurried toward the school building. Charlotte didn't actually have any commitment to help her teacher, but she needed to get away from the playground and the possibility of hearing more hurtful comments. She found herself in the school library, a quiet sanctuary where students could go to read or study during their break time. The librarian, Mrs. Davies, was a kind, elderly woman who had always treated Charlotte with the same gentle care she showed all her students. She looked up with a smile as Charlotte entered. "Hello, dear. Are you looking for a particular book today?" Mrs. Davies asked. Charlotte shook her head, settling into one of the comfortable reading chairs near the window. "I just wanted somewhere quiet to think, if that's all right." Mrs. Davies studied Charlotte's troubled expression with the perceptive eye of someone who had worked with children for many years. "Of course, love. Sometimes we all need a peaceful place to sort through our thoughts. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need." As Charlotte sat in the calm atmosphere of the library, surrounded by books and the gentle sound of Mrs. Davies organizing the returns, she tried to make sense of the conflicting emotions swirling through her mind. Her parents had explained that people sometimes said untrue things about their family. But what if these weren't untrue things? What if there really was something in her family's history that she didn't know about? Something that cast a shadow over everything she had believed about her parents' love story. The older girl's words kept repeating in her mind. Homewrecker, stole Prince William, destroyed someone else's relationship. These were adult concepts that Charlotte didn't fully understand, but she could sense their ugliness and the hurt they implied. The idea that her beloved mother could have caused someone else pain was almost impossible for her young mind to accept. When the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch break, Charlotte reluctantly left the library and returned to her classroom. She tried to focus on her afternoon lessons, but her concentration kept wavering. During their creative writing exercise, while other students crafted stories about adventures and magical creatures, Charlotte found herself staring at her blank paper, unable to summon the imagination and optimism that usually made writing one of her favorite activities. Mrs. Henderson noticed Charlotte's distraction and made a mental note to check in with her after class. The teacher had heard whispers among the parent community about some unfortunate comments that had been made at Friday's fundraiser, and she suspected that Charlotte might be dealing with the fallout from adult gossip. As the school day ended and Charlotte prepared to go home with her brothers, she felt a heavy weight settling on her shoulders. The walk to their car was usually filled with chatter about the day's events, but today Charlotte found herself walking slightly apart from George and Louis, lost in her troubled thoughts. George, always observant when it came to his siblings, noticed Charlotte's mood during the drive home. "You've been quiet again today," he said, his voice gentle but concerned. "Are you still thinking about what that woman said on Friday?" Charlotte nodded, not trusting herself to speak without crying. The accumulation of hurtful comments over the past few days was beginning to feel overwhelming, especially since she couldn't shake the feeling that there might be some truth hidden within the gossip. "Maybe you should talk to Mummy and Daddy about it again, George suggested. Sometimes things make more sense when you talk them through with someone who cares about you. When they arrived home, Catherine was waiting in the kitchen with Louis's favorite after-school snack of apple slices and cheese. She took one look at Charlotte's expression and immediately knew that something had happened at school. "Charlotte, sweetheart, come sit with me," Catherine said, patting the chair beside her at the kitchen counter. "You look like you've had a difficult day." Charlotte climbed onto the chair and leaned against her mother's side, breathing in the familiar, comforting scent that had always made her feel safe. "Mummy, why do people keep saying mean things about you? Even the older kids at school are talking about it now." Catherine's heart clenched as she realized that the gossip was spreading beyond the adult community to the children as well. She had hoped that Friday's incident would be isolated, but it seemed that once such rumors began circulating, they had a way of multiplying and reaching into every corner of their community. "What did you hear today?" Catherine asked gently, though part of her dreaded the answer. Charlotte repeated the older girl's comments, her voice small and confused. "They said you stole Daddy from someone else, that you were a homewrecker." "What does that even mean, Mummy? And why would people think that about you when you're so kind to everyone?" Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes as she heard her daughter struggling with concepts that no 8-year-old should have to contemplate. The complexity of adult relationships, the messy reality of how love sometimes develops, and the public's tendency to oversimplify and judge were all far beyond what Charlotte should need to understand at her age. "Oh, my darling girl," Catherine said, wrapping her arms around Charlotte and holding her close. "I'm so sorry that people are saying things that hurt and confuse you. It's not fair that their words are making you worry about our family." "But is any of it true?" Charlotte asked, her voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. "Did you take Daddy away from someone else? Did you hurt someone to be with him?" Catherine was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. She and William had always committed to being honest with their children while also protecting them from adult complexities they weren't ready to handle. This situation required a delicate balance between truth and age-appropriate explanation. "Charlotte, the story of how Daddy and I came to be together is more complicated than people make it sound when they gossip," Catherine began slowly. "When adults fall in love, sometimes it doesn't happen in a neat, simple way. Sometimes relationships end and new ones begin, and feelings can be hurt even when no one means for that to happen." Charlotte pulled back slightly to look at her mother's face, searching for understanding. "So someone did get hurt?" Catherine nodded gently. "Yes, sweetheart. When Daddy and I realized we loved each other, it meant that his previous relationship had to end. That was painful for everyone involved, including Daddy and me. We never wanted to hurt anyone, but sometimes grown-up life is complicated in ways that cause pain even when people are trying to do the right thing." Charlotte absorbed this information, her young mind working to process the idea that her parents' love story, which she had always seen as purely beautiful, might have included sadness and difficulty for other people. "Did you know you were going to hurt someone when you fell in love with Daddy?" "Love doesn't usually ask our permission before it happens," Catherine explained, brushing a gentle hand through Charlotte's hair. "Daddy and I tried very hard to handle the situation with kindness and respect for everyone involved. But we couldn't control how other people would see our choices or what stories they would tell about us later." Charlotte considered this, feeling a mixture of sadness and confusion. She could understand that her parents hadn't meant to hurt anyone, but she could also imagine how painful it must have been for the other person involved. It made her feel sorry for someone she didn't even know, while also making her worry about how such complexities might affect her own understanding of love and relationships someday. "The people who are talking about it now," Charlotte said after a moment, "they make it sound like you were mean and selfish. But you're not mean or selfish. You help people and care about everyone." Catherine smiled sadly, recognizing her daughter's struggle to reconcile the gossip with her direct experience of her mother's character. People sometimes tell stories about others that focus only on one part of the situation, usually the most dramatic part. They don't talk about all the other aspects of a person's life or character because those parts aren't as interesting to discuss. So they're not exactly lying, but they're not telling the whole truth either? Charlotte asked, beginning to understand the complexity of how rumors and gossip operated. That's a very wise way to put it, Catherine said, impressed by her daughter's insight. When people gossip, they often take small pieces of truth and turn them into bigger, more dramatic stories. The result isn't completely false, but it's not a fair or complete picture of what really happened or who the people involved really are. As they talked, William arrived home from his afternoon appointments. He immediately sensed the serious nature of the conversation taking place in the kitchen and joined them, taking a seat across from Charlotte and Catherine. "More difficult questions?" he asked gently, reaching out to take Charlotte's small hand in his. Charlotte nodded, looking between her parents with eyes that seemed older than they had just a week ago. "I keep hearing things at school, and I'm trying to understand what's true and what isn't. Mummy explained some of it, but I still feel confused about everything." William squeezed her hand reassuringly. It's natural to feel confused when you're learning about complicated adult situations for the first time. Even grown-ups sometimes struggle to understand how relationships work and why people make the choices they do. "Daddy," Charlotte said hesitantly, "do you ever feel sorry about what happened? About someone getting hurt so that you and Mummy could be together?" William's expression grew thoughtful and somewhat sad. "Yes, Charlotte, I do feel sorry about the pain that was caused. Your mother and I both carry some sadness about that. But we also know that we couldn't have built a false or forced relationship just to avoid difficult conversations. Sometimes in life, we have to make choices that aren't perfect, and we have to live with the consequences while trying to be the best people we can be moving forward." Charlotte absorbed this, beginning to understand that her parents weren't perfect heroes from a fairy tale, but real people who had faced difficult decisions and lived with their consequences. It was a more complex view of her family than she had held before, but it also felt more honest and ultimately more secure than the simplified version she had believed as a younger child. "The people who talk about us," William continued, "they weren't there when these things happened. They don't know what we felt or what we struggled with or how hard we try to handle everything with dignity and kindness. They just know the basic facts, and they use those facts to create stories that fit their own ideas about right and wrong." As the conversation continued, Charlotte felt a gradual sense of peace settling over her troubled thoughts. Her parents hadn't hidden the truth from her, but they had presented it in a way that helped her understand the difference between the complexity of real life and the oversimplified drama of gossip. She could see that they felt genuine regret about any pain they had caused while also standing firm in their belief that their love was real and worth the difficulties they had faced. That evening, as the Wales family settled into their normal bedtime routine, there was a sense of resolution in the air that hadn't been there for several days. Charlotte had spent the rest of the afternoon playing with her brothers in the garden, and while she still seemed more thoughtful than usual, the heavy cloud of confusion and distress had largely lifted from her young shoulders. Lewis had fallen asleep easily, exhausted from a day of typical 5-year-old adventures, and George had settled in with a new book about marine biology that had captured his imagination. But William sensed that Charlotte might need some extra attention before sleep, so he suggested they spend a bit more time together in her room. As they sat on Charlotte's bed, with the soft glow of her bedside lamp creating a cozy atmosphere, William found himself reflecting on how much his daughter had grown over the past week. The innocent little girl who had bounced excitedly on the same bed just a few days earlier had been forced to grapple with adult complexities that he had hoped to shield her from for a few more years. "Daddy," Charlotte said quietly, arranging her favorite stuffed animal beside her pillow, "I've been thinking about what you and Mummy told me earlier, about how sometimes people get hurt even when no one means for it to happen." William nodded, waiting for her to continue. He had learned over the years that Charlotte often needed time to process information before sharing her thoughts, and rushing her usually resulted in incomplete conversations. I think I understand now why the people at school were saying those things, Charlotte continued. They heard part of story and decided that made you and Mummy bad people. But they don't know you like I do. They don't know how kind you are to people, or how you always try to help others, or how much you love our family. That's exactly right, William said, feeling a surge of pride at his daughter's mature understanding. People often make judgments based on limited information, especially about public figures like our family. They forget that we're real people with complicated feelings and difficult decisions, just like everyone else. Charlotte was quiet for a moment, absently stroking her stuffed animal's soft fur. I feel sorry for the person who got hurt, she said finally. Even though I don't know who they are or what really happened, I feel sad that someone was sad because of our family. William felt his heart clench at his daughter's empathy and emotional maturity. That's very compassionate of you, Charlotte. It shows what a kind person you are that you can feel concern for someone you've never met. That empathy is one of your greatest strengths. Will people always talk about our family this way? Charlotte asked, a note of worry creeping into her voice. Will there always be people who want to say mean things about us? William considered how to answer this honestly without frightening her. There probably will always be some people who are interested in gossiping about our family or who have opinions about our lives. But, Charlotte, that says more about them than it does about us. People who choose to spread hurtful stories or make judgments about situations they don't truly understand, that behavior reflects their character, not ours. Charlotte nodded thoughtfully. Like the princess in the story we read. She couldn't control what the mean people said about her, but she could control how she responded to them. Exactly like that, William agreed, impressed once again by his daughter's ability to draw connections and find wisdom in the stories they shared. The princess stayed true to her values and the people she loved, regardless of what others said about her. That's what gave her strength. As William tucked Charlotte into bed and kissed her goodnight, he reflected on how this difficult week had revealed new depths to his daughter's character. She had faced her first real encounter with the public scrutiny that would be part of her life as a member of the royal family. And while it had shaken her initially, she had emerged with greater understanding and resilience. Daddy, Charlotte's voice was sleepy but thoughtful as he reached the door. Yes, sweetheart. Tomorrow at school, if someone says something mean about our family again, I think I know what to say. I can tell them that they don't know us, and that people who spread hurtful stories are usually just trying to make themselves feel important. William smiled, though his heart ached slightly at the realization that his 8-year-old daughter was already having to develop strategies for dealing with public criticism. That sounds like a very wise response. And remember, if you ever feel overwhelmed or upset by what people say, you can always talk to your teacher or call home. You never have to handle difficult situations all by yourself. As Charlotte drifted off to sleep, she felt a sense of peace that had been missing since Friday afternoon. The world was more complicated than she had realized, and her family's story included chapters that weren't entirely happy or simple. But the foundation of love and trust that her parents had built remained solid, and she had learned valuable lessons about the difference between gossip and truth, between public perception and private reality. The next few days at school passed more smoothly. Charlotte noticed that Mrs. Thornfield seemed to be avoiding the school community, perhaps having realized that her gossip hadn't been well received by the other parents. The older girls who had made comments on Monday appeared to have moved on to other topics of conversation, and Charlotte found herself feeling more confident in her ability to handle any future incidents. Emma and Sophie, Charlotte's closest friends, seemed to sense that she had been dealing with something difficult, and they rallied around her with the kind of loyal support that makes childhood friendships so precious. They didn't pry into what had been troubling her, but they made sure to include her in all their activities and conversations, creating a buffer of normalcy and affection around her. Mrs. Henderson also kept a careful eye on Charlotte during this period, ready to intervene if any further incidents occurred. She had spoken quietly with several key parents in the school community, not to create drama but to ensure that the adult community understood the importance of protecting all the children from inappropriate gossip and speculation. At home, life gradually returned to its normal rhythms, though Charlotte's parents remained alert for signs that she might be struggling with lingering effect from her week of difficult revelations. They were pleased to see that she seemed to be integrating her new understanding into her worldview without losing her fundamental optimism or trust in her family. One evening about a week later, as the family sat together in their living room after dinner, Charlotte made an observation that surprised everyone with its maturity and insight. "You know," she said, looking up from the puzzle she was working on with Lewis, "I think I'm actually glad that I learned about all this now, even though it was hard at first." Catherine and William exchanged glances, curious about where this comment was leading. "Why is that, sweetheart?" Catherine asked, setting down her book to give Charlotte her full attention. "Because now I know that our family is strong enough to handle difficult things," Charlotte explained, fitting a puzzle piece into place with satisfaction. "If people say mean things about us, it doesn't change who we really are or how much we love each other. And I know that you and Daddy will always tell me the truth, even when the truth is complicated." George, who had been listening while pretending to focus on his homework, looked up with a smile. "Plus, now you know how to spot when people are just gossiping instead of actually knowing what they're talking about. That's a useful skill." William laughed, recognizing his son's practical approach to life's challenges. "You're both absolutely right. Sometimes the difficult experiences we face end up teaching us important lessons and making us stronger." As the evening progressed and the children prepared for bed, Charlotte felt a deep sense of gratitude for her family and the way they had handled this challenging situation. Her parents hadn't tried to pretend that the world was always fair or kind, but they had given her the tools to navigate its complexities with confidence and grace. The incident with Mrs. Thornfield and the subsequent gossip had been Charlotte's introduction to a reality she would face throughout her life as a member of the royal family. The reality that some people would always be ready to criticize, speculate, and judge based on incomplete information. But rather than leaving her feeling vulnerable or defensive, this early experience had actually strengthened her sense of identity and her trust in the people who truly knew and loved her. In the weeks that followed, Charlotte carried herself with a new kind of quiet confidence. She had learned the difference between public opinion and private truth, between the stories people told and the reality of lived experience. When she occasionally overheard comments about her family, whether positive or negative, she was able to evaluate them with the discernment of someone who understood that public figures were often reduced to simplified narratives that bore little resemblance to their actual lives. The experience had also deepened Charlotte's appreciation for the genuine relationships in her life. She valued her friendships more highly, knowing that true friends would stand by her regardless of what others might say. She felt more grateful for her family's closeness, understanding that not everyone was lucky enough to have people who would protect and support them through difficult times. Most importantly, Charlotte had learned to trust her own judgment about the people she loved. Mrs. Thornfield's words had initially planted seeds of doubt because Charlotte had been so young and trusting that she had never questioned the perfection of her family's story. But going through the process of examining those doubts, asking difficult questions, and receiving honest answers had actually strengthened her confidence in her parents and her understanding of their characters. As Christmas approached that year, Charlotte found herself reflecting on how much she had grown and changed since the autumn fundraiser that had started this whole journey of discovery. She was still the same loving, enthusiastic little girl she had always been, but she now possessed a wisdom and resilience that would serve her well throughout her life. During the family's Christmas Eve tradition of sharing what they were most grateful for from the past year, Charlotte surprised everyone with her response. "I'm grateful that I learned some hard things this year," she said seriously, her blue eyes reflecting the glow of the Christmas tree lights. "Because now I know that our family can get through anything together, and I know that the love we have is real and strong enough to handle whatever people might say about us." William and Catherine exchange a look of profound pride and relief, realizing that their daughter had not only survived her first encounter with public scrutiny, but had emerged from it with a deeper understanding of herself and her family. The little girl who had been so shaken by a stranger's malicious words had grown into a young person who understood the difference between truth and gossip, between public perception and private reality. As Charlotte settled into bed that Christmas Eve, she felt peaceful and secure in a way that was different from her childhood innocence. She had faced difficulty and uncertainty, asked hard questions, and received honest answers. She knew now that her family's love was not a fairy tale perfection, but something more valuable, a real, complex, enduring bond between people who chose to stand by each other through both joy and challenge. The princess in Charlotte's favorite storybook had faced her trials with courage and emerged stronger and wiser. Charlotte realized that she had become something like that princess herself, not through magical adventures, but through the very real process of growing up and learning to navigate a world that could be both wonderful and difficult. As she drifted off to sleep, Charlotte carried with her the knowledge that she was loved completely and unconditionally, that her parents were real people who had faced real challenges and emerged with their integrity intact, and that she possessed the strength and wisdom to handle whatever complexities life might bring her way. The innocent little girl who had awakened so excitedly on that autumn morning was gone, replaced by someone more mature and resilient, but no less capable of joy, wonder, and love.